and welcome everybody here. I have the pleasure and the honor of speaking with a colleague and a friend of mine, Dr. Kris Lee. We work together at Northeastern University, and beyond that, she's an amazing, amazing human being, and so sweet, so kind, so attentive and patient. And today I thought it would be very fitting because of Mental Health Awareness Month to talk about, and also it aligns with your new book, which I would love for you to speak about, to talk a little bit about mental health and stress and resilience, which I know is um, some of your favorite topics to talk about. And so I would love for you to give us a little brief um, intro about who you want to present to the world and to this audience, and then speak a little bit about your book, and then we'll just have a casual conversation like we usually do.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to see you, and just delighted for everyone that can tune in now and who might have a look later. One of the things I love about what you're all doing is, just creating access and creating candid conversation, which we know is just so critical. So I feel like a theme we can unpack is that help helps. And it's like the simplest thing, but I feel like it's helped me a lot through moments of peril. It's something I share with my students and the patients that I serve, and just like anyone that recognizes that hiding doesn't serve us well, and we need to find our way to tap into the many forms of healing that are available. So yeah, I think it's really great to my roots are in community work. So yes, I'm at Northeastern proudly now, but my footing still remains deeply in a community model. We know for one like that stigma is particularly pervasive in BIPOC communities and underrepresented communities, and we know that families of origin and communities of origin can dictate safety and accessing help.
Mhm.
And I know you and I have chatted a lot about that. And so I just feel honored to be here to think about this. And I don't want to sound cliche, but I think small things make a big difference when it comes to our mental health. And just knowing that we can find a path um, for someone that we trust to reveal what we might be grappling with. And I think one thing we all discover when we get the courage to do that is that we're not alone. Um, I'm not a fan of that old school 1950s hangover, like mental health condition for those people over there. But I would describe it as human condition. Um, and when we look at ourselves in context, we recognize that if we weren't experiencing a lot of stress, we probably wouldn't be paying attention.
Yeah, I really appreciate the beginning of what you said about help helps. I definitely have heard you say that before, but and it sounds so simple, but it's so true. And I think it also speaks to that the conversation in your book that thank you so much for giving me about those like the idea of the clean slate and really recognizing that change can feel more possible in
Mhm.
like smaller increments. So for the people that might feel exhausted or live in environments that aren't always supportive, whether that's home, job, or the community spaces, how can they have a clean slate? Like, what does that mean? What's that mindset mean? And what are some of the things that they can do to kind of ground themselves in moments where, or in environments where it's not necessarily afforded to them, especially in communities that aren't particularly always the most mentally sound.
I think the key thing is that like there's never one size fits all formula when it comes to our well-being and tapping into things that can help. And so I think to that end, I think a lot about mindsets and how they affect our behaviors. And I got really kind of obsessed with it, through the pandemic and through just seeing, the current state. And there's so much at hand to be concerned with. It just can escalate stress. And then when we're in that escalated or activated state, or even experiencing, traumatic events constantly, um, it can be hard to have clarity or peace of mind. And that can sort of lead us to more downward spirals, if you will, or just leave us in like that constant state of anxiety. So I would say that the clean slate mindset, sort of as I was thinking about this and talking to my students about it and just looking at everything that we're all up against, that every day is a new beginning. Even like the afternoon, the morning is like ridiculous. The afternoon could be better. And I think especially when we feel like we want to go after positive change in our life and then we fall short, I feel so badly because I think we end up being so critical of ourselves and we get judgy with ourselves and one another, like, oh, why did we do this or what? And I think we have to take a step back and realize that we definitely learn from when things, don't go right. We learn when things go wrong. And none of us are robots or machines. None of us are infallible. We're subject to all kinds of things in our shared humanity. And to that end, like beating ourselves up does no service at all. Or if we feel like we're just still carrying, like, oh, I didn't finish my checklist yesterday, or I blew up on my kids, or, I like didn't go to the gym even though I said I was, or I was like trying to eat well and then I ate that bag of chips, right? So the clean slate mindset is the idea that if you're trying to make positive, good changes in your life, it's okay if you mess up. It's not like on your permanent record. And so I think I like little metaphors. I like to use a lot of creative things to help us remember these things because when we're in the throes of it, it's like super hard to remember. So I talk about the clean slate because I think that's a great metaphor. And then the other one is I talk about the tiny turtle and the idea that we don't have to barrel through our goals with all this velocity, hashtag boss up, hashtag live your best life kind of stuff. But we can just take small strategic steps towards the change. And I think right now the times are so heavy and we can feel paralyzed and riddled with fear. And I think that's a time especially that our mental health can get compromised and we're not able to optimize our talent or our potential. So what I would say to anyone who really wants to aspire to bring their best to the world, not because they want to be like successful and have, this like status, but if you're trying to, let's say, break a cycle of challenges in your family, or you're trying to take steps towards your education, or just taking the things you know and the wisdom you have and sharing it more readily and feeling up for that. Or even like a lot of us are afraid to leave the house these days, or like take these little steps to that we know would be good for us, but we can't like muster up the strength and the energy. So to that, I would just say, don't set some ridiculously lofty, grand goal, but just start small and give yourself that measure of self-compassion. That each day you learn new things. Every day is different. There's different circumstances, different energy levels. There's a lot at hand. And I think another way I might put that is it's okay not to be okay, but you don't have to stay stuck. So I think we feel stuck when we think we have to do it just right, or we can't mess up, or we just start hating on it. And I think that can get in the way of actual progress.
I couldn't agree more. Actually, I have been guilty of being too hard on myself about like either achieving one out of two goals, two out of three goals, one out of five goals, right? And you're like, oh, that's great, but I didn't do this. You focus on the things that you have not been able to accomplish as opposed to taking a step back and being like, oh, you were able to accomplish this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say goals, it doesn't always have to be something like grandiose. It could just be the goal of the day. Two goals. Like if you're like, these are the two things I really got to get done today. And the reality of the situation is that sometimes life happens and whatever is happening in the day, whatever some things take priorities, things may happen. You might not feel completely up to it. You might have planned for that yesterday, but today mentally you're not entirely there. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. Like we're human. you know? And sometimes we get conflicting to that end. Sometimes you get conflicting advice online about like hustle culture and letting yourself down if you don't meet your goals and or girl bossing or all these like other things to motivate people to like push through their like their issues or that barrier that they might have mentally.
Mhm.
And so to me, how do we, my question to you following up with all the noise online, right? So there's good advice out there and then there's bad advice. And we know how that goes. Bad advice travels just as fast as good advice and sometimes even faster.
Yeah.
What I want to know is how do we, how do we how are we more gentle on ourselves? Because you're talking about like, how about we make these smaller goals and be okay if sometimes that's not what ends up happening in the day? Like, how do we how do we care for ourselves in a way that's gentler and give ourselves grace? What are some things that we can do to like reframe ourselves when we're striving for change, you know?
I think I think it hinges on like what really matters to us and what we care about. So another way to think about that is like, what are your values? Like, what do you want your legacy to be? And do you believe that a lot of that stuff is being like constantly fed to, like just you look at your feed, it's this constant hype, or like you said, this group thing, or this like negative contagion. Like if you don't do this, like you're a hot mess or you're an epic failure. So I think we have to have our own clarity and our own compass on what our values are and what matters. And then I think that allows us for like a better assessment of ourselves and a more measured approach, right? So like, for example, if you're like oh yeah, like I have to have this and that to be worthy or like to be cool or to be accepted, or I have, I have to like do this thing that everyone else is doing, even if it's like the handbag or the fancy car, whatever it is. I think we often fall short on that. Or like think of someone who's an artist, for example. They love art, they love music, they want to express themselves in a certain way. But if they're just thinking from the lens of like earning money or just status, like that can get in the way. So I think we get haunted by a lot of the messaging writ large. But when we know what makes us tick and what we value, it allows us to adjust our behavior. And I've seen evidence of that in all of my life's work and my own experiences as a person who struggles with anxiety and with sort of this like unhealthy comparison or perfectionism. You have to like kind of speak back to it and not let it just like, that toxic inner critic rent space in your head all the time.
Oh, oh
Um,
yeah.
right. So I think, it's a process, right? It's like unlearning and relearning what makes for a life of like peace and enjoyment and like connection. Because when we're sort of like hell bent that we have to have this precise thing for success, most people, when they get to that point, it was for everybody else and not themselves. So I think that's a piece. And the other thing that I think, like, I'm going to nerd out a little bit, but I'm really interested in social comparison because obviously in the last decade, they say perfectionism has gone up by 33%,
Wow.
and that social comparison is the driving force. And then we also know social anxiety is a major, it's the fastest growing anxiety spectrum disorder. So I kind of got like, okay, like what's with social comparison? Like, what's the deal? Like, how can we make sense of it? And what I discovered in my research is that it's kind of like there's two sides of the point. So on one hand, if we compare ourselves against people's, especially too if it's like their feed and their curation and the filters, obviously that's like a slippery slope. But so comparing ourselves against someone else's fake images isn't helpful. But the thing that's really interesting is if we look at people with shared values and that maybe they're a little further ahead than us in a certain way, we can use that as inspiration. And we can take that comparison and leverage it. And then the other side of it that's interesting to me too, it's a little bit, it's a little tricky, I think, but you can also take perspective. If, say, you're in a situation where you have things that you are grateful for, you have your strengths, the resources, things that are going well, and then you say, I know someone that has cancer, or they have this other major financial crisis they're in, or their kids having a, so we can also remember when we see people going through it, what we can appreciate, and then how that can fortify our own well-being and resilience, right? So it helps us deal with our own stress in a unique way. So it's not that we're glad someone else is going through it, but it can give us perspective and momentum. So I think it's just cool to think about the different ways social comparison can either haunt or help us, and then be
Mhm.
mindful about the choices we make. Speaking of clean slate and mindset, if you've been that person who kind of like screen sucks and you're like looking at, and you're like, oh, why are they doing this? And you don't have to keep doing that. Like, you can break that habit and you can break that cycle. Like, you know already it's not good for you. So then you can set goals to start weaning yourself and get to a better place, so that what you're taking in helps you advance what's really important to you. And I think it's just hard. Like, this stuff is very enticing and it pulls us. But we don't want to give ourselves over in that kind of way, because ultimately we're not going to live a life of peace and presence. So I love the high five coming through. Hi there, how's it going? Thanks for joining us.
For joining us. That's the African market. Thank you so much. I mean, you mentioned something about building resilience, and I mean, first of all, heard that, and I think that it's super important tying into the social comparison, social anxiety rising. Which thank you for that fact because I didn't even really realize that, but it does make sense. That 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 also helps with or that is you're seeing the rise of that with the rise of accessibility to people globally because of social media. So social media is a good and a bad thing because we all see the highlight reels. We see all of the things that people are doing that they want to share, and people tend to share more of good than bad online, right? And so with that being said, you might sometimes have to build resilience, build discernment, and also set boundaries for yourself for that social comparison? And what are some really quick, actionable ways that you can suggest that people set boundaries with themselves in regards to comparing themselves socially to peers who they don't even really know? Because back in the day, it was like your neighborhood friends, your friends at school, your friends at church, or wherever your social institutions were that you would compare yourself to. But now we are comparing ourselves to somebody that lives in Dubai, lives in, in parts of the world that we have not even seen. So
Yeah,
how do we ground ourselves? How do we set those boundaries with ourselves to I mean, it's impossible to eliminate, but how do we minimize those things?
I think that, I know we have a half an hour allocated, right? So or
Mhm.
about, I think, and I had to, I had a little change in schedule, so I'm like in the corner of a restaurant that's closing momentarily. So I'm like, I promise I'll be out here. Um, but no, I would say that I think what we know from a behavior change standpoint, if you have a behavior you want to change and you know it's not helping, is to find someone to be accountable with. So that could be a friend, a therapist, it could be a coach, it could be someone in your family, and just say, I need help with this, I'm struggling with this thing, and I'm going to make a commitment to do this new thing. And then if you want to add a little spice to it, you can also like maybe keep a jar. So this is based on research. You can like find yourself $1 every time you go over what your goal, if you like, and then maybe donate that to like your favorite nonprofit, so there's different things we can do. And that's like a huge part of my work and my discussion in Clean Slate for all these strategies. So I think just one, like enlisting help, creating a system of accountability, rewarding yourself when you do well, not punishing yourself. So the accountability piece should never be like mean or anything like that, and obviously if you're gonna like find yourself, you're not like, know, do it like in a way that's not awfully painful, but maybe that it goes for good, right? But those are some of the proven ways that we know can help us make those changes. We know writing things down, journaling, you know, setting smaller goals, and then gaining momentum slowly over time. Those are the kinds of things that we know really help us advance the change we want to make.
Thank you so much. I know that we are pressed for time and we only have about 4 minutes. I know that we've had a couple of people in and out of the chat, so please feel free to drop any questions that you have that for Dr. Kristen Lee. I sincerely appreciate all the time that you've given us. I know time is valuable, time is precious, and you do have a lot on your plate. So thank you so much for always saying yes to the things, always willing to pour into communities, always willing to give insights and reminding us to always stay grounded, be gentle on ourselves, knowing that help helps. And I'm going to take away with that, like making sure that I write things down. I don't often write things down
Yeah.
sometimes, but I do find when I do, I feel more grounded and present in whatever it is that I'm doing, right? So, like, that is so helpful. I know it sounds so simple, and a lot of people, we're always looking for like this wonderful insight, right? Like, what is the world groundbreaking research that's going to stop all the anxiety and all these things? And it's like, that's not going to happen. It's a part of human nature.
I mean, like, there's a lot of that, right? Like we talked about, and the snake oil of like, or just do these like 3 steps. And it's like, sometimes it's the chip away approach, the tiny turtle approach to like,
Yes.
I'm going to write down like my 1 word intention. Or like during the pandemic, when it was just, it was so intense. It was like, write down your favorite thing of the day or the ugh of the day, like the worst thing of the day. Like just documenting progress and like acknowledging how difficult things are. We don't have to like be toxically positive and pretend everything's fine when
Right.
it's not. It's also like trying to discover what is good and what is true and what is possible, and leveraging that at the same time. So I just want to say thank you to everyone too for the work you're doing, and encourage everyone, just to do what you can each day, and just remember every day is truly a new beginning, a clean slate, and that it's not just like a feel good kind of slogan thing, but it's actually backed by a lot of, clinical understandings and a lot of research of, um, and I think the key is just, tapping into the help that exists, and looking across sort of who you have in your life already, and then what else, maybe who else you could add in to help guide you in thinking strategically. And that's why I'm such a proponent of therapy, because I know it can sometimes feel like a huge deal to take that step. But I have found, I've been in this field. I just celebrated my 25-year anniversary from getting my MSW, and I'm like, you know what? It's interesting how everyone's so afraid to come into therapy. And I'm like, what do they think I'm going to do? Like, and then like how relieved they are. And it's not. They're like, it's not like it's on TV. I'm like, I know. So, but Denise, thank you so much to you and to everyone who's tuning in now or later. And I hope we can keep thinking about the conversation, inspiring each other.
Absolutely. And as you know, I'm always appreciative of your insights and your conversation and our banter. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for doing this live with me today. And everyone, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming. Everyone, please have a great evening and be well.